So part of the story, as far as I want to share this little tidbit about part of the story about Opal when the things came out that said, hey, can you, if you're interested in signing up, do you want to sign up? I believe your dad sent in a video of you singing here at the church. And they saw it and immediately responded back yes, she can do 30 minutes, please. But I want to bring that because that's one of the things that we do here, right? Is we give people an opportunity to explore their gifts and their graces and give them a chance to do stuff that you probably wouldn't otherwise do. And that's part of what we do is we build people up. And that's what the church is for. And that has nothing to do with today's sermon, so I'm just going to put that at the beginning. And now we're going to talk about hubris, which Opal does not have. Okay, I just want to be clear about where we're going with it. I'm sitting there how do I fit this in? I'm I can't. So, all right. So we got today chapter 5, and I did tell you we weren't going to read chapter 5, 6, and 7, but we did just read all of chapter 5, by the way, for those keeping score at home. And it starts off with Esther. So we left off last week with Esther preparing to go do this thing where she quite possibly was taking her life into her hands. And it led to this back and forth between her and Mordecai. And then she embarked on a 3-day fast, invited all these other people to fast. And so there's all this buildup and all this tension. And then the day finally comes that she's going to do this thing. And she puts on her best outfit and does everything she can. And then she walks in and the king's like, hey, how you doing? Come on in. I mean, it's really kind of an anticlimactic moment, if we're honest. It actually reminded me of this scene from Indiana Jones. Do you remember this scene where, we get to watch this guy do all this fancy sword stuff and then Indiana Jones just pulls out his gun and shoots the guy? By the way, that's not what the script said. Harrison Ford was really, really tired that day. They'd already done a lot of work. This whole thing was improv, and they kept it, and they liked it in the movie. There was supposed to be this whole battle, and he just didn't want to have anything to do with it because it was Egypt in the summertime. All right. But it's kind of like that, right? You're wait a minute, all this buildup, all this back and forth, all this hand-wringing for, oh my gosh. And the first thing out of the king's mouth is, come on in, what do you want, even if it's half of my kingdom? So we can see is that the things are changing, right? So, and the inertia is changing, and that's really what happens in these chapters. These are, for me, Esther is one of my favorite books just because it's such a great story, and these chapters 5, 6, and 7 are probably my favorite chapters in it because it is just such a good thing. So Esther goes in, she's dressed well, she's ready to negotiate, and the king comes in, and he's very happy to see her, obviously, and says, what do you want? Now, Esther rather wisely knows that she can't come out and just ask for what she wants, right? Because she wants a couple of things. One is she wants to save her people, but two, she now knows that Haman's responsible for this, and as long as Haman's around, she's probably going to continue to have problems. But Haman's pretty tight with the king. So she knows she's smart enough to know she can't just come in and ask for everything she wants right away, right? We got to lead up to this a little bit. And she does it with one of the few things she could do, right? I mean, yes, she's queen, but she doesn't really have a lot of her own power. She doesn't have a lot of her own authority. But what she has is the attention of the king. And so she needs to use that. She needs to use that power she has to use the attention of the king to get him in a place where she can get what she actually wants. And she does this by throwing yet another banquet. I know you were hoping there would be another banquet, right? This is banquet number 5, by the way, if you're for those who are keeping track. And she's like, and I've already got it prepared. So of course they're like, yes, this sounds great. And Haman goes along and he thinks this is great too. The queen sees that I'm important. I'm the number 2 around here. And so Haman just thinks this is the greatest thing ever. And both of them are still, Haman especially, are still vastly underestimating Esther. They are assuming Esther is just some silly girl. And they're going to find out that that is not true. Now, if you're having a hard time kind of locating Haman and who he really is, in this story, Haman is basically almost completely Jafar from Aladdin. That's the character. He is Jafar from Aladdin, and that's what it goes on. And like Jafar, he's going to have a similar problem, right? He's going to think he's getting his way when in fact he is not. By the way, I didn't know this. Aladdin, the story of Aladdin was actually originally a Chinese folk tale. That's where the most original version was set, and only in like the 1600s did it become lumped in with like the Middle Eastern folk tales, but it originally is not that. And there were two genies. And I'm like, two Robin Williams? How's that going to work? I don't know. But he is like it does help to understand him in this way because that's who he is. He thinks he's overestimating his own abilities. He's overestimating his positions. And as we saw at the end of this chapter, he continues to be a person, much like Jafar, who really is primarily ruled by his emotions, right? We learn in this chapter that he is wealthy in all the ways people want to be wealthy. He's got money, he's got power, he's got sons, and I assume some daughters in there too. He's got everything that anybody could want, and yet the fact that there's this one guy sitting over there who doesn't think he's all that is somehow driving him so crazy that he will actually put in jeopardy everything else. This is not a logical response. It's not a sane response. This is an emotional response. And Haman continues, as does, honestly, the king. Frankly, as do all the male characters in this story, continue to be ruled by their emotions. Thankfully, we have some logical thinkers in the story, the women. And even in this case, even though she's not a particularly, it's not a particularly great suggestion, even Haman's wife finally comes up with a logical solution to his problem, which is, why don't you just get rid of that guy? If he bothers you so much, you're second in command of the king. Nobody's going to notice if you kind of get rid of him. Build a gallows, get rid of him, problem solved. And Haman, of course, goes, well, why didn't I think of that? And so he does it, and he goes to bed thinking he's not only has everything he wants, but is about to get everything he wants, and the tables are about to turn in a pretty strong way. Now, if we keep reading, what we're going to read is that the king can't sleep. And so the king can't sleep, and so what he decides to do is he gets one of his servants to bring him the annals. Basically, he tells the servants, like, hey, you know that place where we write down all the stuff about me? Could you bring that and read it to me so that I could be reminded of how great I am? That is basically the king's request. And so they do, and they go get the annals, and they come back, and they read to him about all these great things about himself, because apparently that's what you do. And one of the things they read to him was about this plot to kill him that Mordecai undid. And he's like, oh, what gift did we give to Mordecai for this? And they're like looking through it, and they're like, well, sir, we didn't do anything. They're like, well, we should do something then, shouldn't we? And they're like, I guess. And so then he calls Haman in and he says, Haman, what should I do for somebody who did something wonderful for me? How should I honor them? And Haman assumes, well, he must be talking about me. Like, who else would he be talking about but me? And so Haman's like, well, you should put your fanciest robe on him, and you should put him on a horse and parade him around the city and make sure everybody knows how great and wonderful this person is. And so, of course, the king has this great moment where he's like, great, you're right. That's what we should do. Here's what's going to happen. You go get that stuff in a horse, go find Mordecai, put him on the horse, and parade him around the city, explaining to everybody how wonderful he is. And, of course, in the back of his head, he's thinking, I was actually going to kill that guy? This is a problem. But the king told him to do it, so he has to do it. If you haven't read chapter 6, read chapter 6. It's a good time. Because you get this. You get Haman, you get Mordecai up there on the horse being paraded around saying, yeah, this guy's the most wonderful thing ever. So that's how that's how Haman's day starts that morning. And then, of course, he goes later to the banquet, Esther. For those keeping track, banquet number 6. Goes to banquet number 6, and the king finally says, Esther, what is it that you want? And then she finally tells him about her people. She reveals the fact that she's a Jew, something that apparently everybody else had missed, and reveals about her people and reveals about this plot against them. And she has this great line in there where she basically said, if you had sold us into slavery, I wouldn't have said anything, but killing us, that just seems a bit much. And he gets really mad and like, well, who did this? And she's like, Haman did it. And then things don't work out well for Haman. Read chapter 7. Esther doesn't know how all of this is going to work out. Esther only knows what she can do, and she seems to have the same faith that Mordecai had earlier in chapter 4. They don't know exactly where salvation is going to come from. They don't exactly know how things are going to work out, but they have confidence that they do, that it's going to. Haman is in a slightly different boat. Haman thinks he knows exactly how things are going to work out and how he wants them to. There's a difference, and the difference is important. Mordecai and Esther especially, has faith that somehow, some way, the right thing is going to happen if she just continues to do what it is she can do. Haman has only one way in his mind that he thinks things are going to work out or wants them to, and his focus on that is really what gets him in trouble at the end. And that's really the difference between having confidence in the way that we are called to have confidence as people of faith, confidence in ourselves, confidence in God, confidence in each other, versus the hubris that quite clearly Haman has that will eventually lead to his downfall. Now, I know I've told this story before, but it's such a good little anecdote. I'm going to tell it again. Several years ago, I got a text from a friend that I worked with. She was a fellow clergy person, and she sent me a text message randomly, and it said, I had a dream about you last night, to which I responded, I'm not sure that's appropriate. And she says, no, I had a dream that we were all together, and you kept trying to get us to go on this train to Hawaii because we needed to go to Hawaii, and we kept telling you trains don't go to Hawaii. And you just kept saying, we'll take the train as far as it goes, and then we'll figure it out from there. And I know I've told it before, but it's pretty much the most perfect description of me and my personality, if you haven't figured that out already, and anybody in this leadership in this church has. We will get to where we're going to go somehow, some way, and we'll go as far as we can. Esther's going to win. Spoiler. Esther's going to win because she has that kind of confidence. She doesn't know exactly what the king's going to do. She doesn't know exactly how it's going to go. But she has faith in what the next step is, and she understands that what she can do, and she has found the something that she can do, and she continues to do the something that she can do, and in the end will trust that she will get to where she wants to go, or where she feels called to go. Haman assumes he knows what's going to happen, and in his mind assumes anything else is never going to happen. It's always going to be good for him. It will never be the case that it is not. He will continue to get his way because he's always got his way, and it will never be the fact that he won't. That will be his undoing. Now, we can't talk about hubris and the problem that it is without talking, of course, about the Titanic. How do you not, right? By the way, how is this like the third highest grossing movie of all time? Everybody knows how it ends, right? And I'm like, the boat sinks. Like, we know that. I remember watching this movie and I'm like, I know what's going to happen. But the Titanic is one of those interesting things because, first off, you should never say that a ship is unsinkable. That's a bad idea. And because you're just sort of asking for it at that point. But they had reasons for it. And if you go back and look at what actually caused this disaster, there really wasn't one cause. But it really was a collective act of hubris. It was a collective act of people getting together saying, well, that's never going to happen, and that's never going to happen. So one of the things one of the big problems that they had, and one of the reasons that the running of the iceberg was as bad as it was, is that the Titanic was basically running at full steam the whole time. because they wanted not only on their maiden voyage get there, but they wanted to get there faster than anybody else had ever got there, because that was a really, really big deal. How fast you could get across the Atlantic was a really big deal, and there were literally prizes for those who could do it the fastest. So they were basically running full steam the whole time, and they were assuming that, well, if there's a problem, the lookouts will tell us, right? So that was the idea. The lookouts upstairs, they're up there. If there's an iceberg or something we need to hit, we will be fine because they will tell us, which would have probably been okay, except that the one thing that the people up in the crow's nest and lacked for looking out were binoculars. They had them. They were in a cabinet that was locked, and nobody on the boat had the key. Because the second officer had the key, who was reassigned right before the ship set sail to a different boat, and the key was still in his pocket. It went to auction recently for a lot of money. That key did. And he knew that he had it, and he assumed it wasn't such a big deal because this ship was unsinkable, and what was the problem going to be? Because what else could possibly have happened that nothing bad is ever going to happen? Now, they also should have been warned that there were ships in the area that had seen icebergs, and they were radioing each other. Radio was new at this point. We don't think about radio being like the quintessential of old technology, but there was a time when, man, the radio was new. And radio was new, and they had it. And so they were getting some message, and other people saying, hey, there's icebergs around. The problem was the guys running the radio room didn't work for the ship. The guys in the radio room worked for the radio company, and their priority was sending the messages from the passengers and receiving messages from the passengers because that's where they made their money. So a secondary priority was messages from other ships saying, oh, hey, by the way, there's a giant iceberg in front of you. So they actually received some messages that we're not sure ever actually got to where they were supposed to go because they were too busy sending messages about dinner reservations for the people on the boat. The ship was designed so that they could have flooding in 4 compartments, but not more than 4 compartments, because the compartments are huge, and what could possibly happen that would ever lead to more than 4 of them? And the problem is when you do have more problems and more than 4 of them, wow, okay. The problem is if you do have problems in more than 4 of them, they stop being watertight compartments and the whole thing basically turns into an ice cube tray. If you ever filled an ice cube tray, you know how the Titanic filled. And then finally, and this is a big deal that's made up today, and one thing we all know, that there weren't enough space in the lifeboats. And the reason was, those boats were not lifeboats. That's not what they were there for. It was assumed that the problems you would have on a boat like that are the problems you always had on boats like that, which if there was a problem, it would be near shore. You would run aground, you would run into something under the water. The boats were not there to be lifeboats. The boats were there to be ferry boats to ferry passengers between the ship and the shore, assuming that if anything went really, really wrong, you'd be close to land because that's what you run into, land. Obviously, all of those assumptions turned out to be untrue. Right? The radio messages were important. You can damage more than 6 compartments. Turns out binoculars would have been handy. Going full speed was probably not the best idea, and it would have been really, really great if there had been space for everybody on a lifeboat. This is a culmination of a lot of people assuming that could never happen. We have this all figured out. We don't need to worry. The sinking of the Titanic is a perfect example of hubris writ large that unfortunately costs lives. Hubris comes in big forms. It also comes in little forms. Sometimes it's about just not seeing things we don't want to see or assuming that we know everything that's going to happen in life. So some of the smaller ways, I got some quotes for you here. Here's some good ones. People who have hubris. Oh my God, I can't read that. It's too tiny. There we go. Yes. This is the Nobel Prize winning economist Paul Krugman in 2005 said in 1998, by 2005 it will become clear that the internet's impact on the economy has been no greater than the fax machines. The one thing you cannot do, by the way, is fax your donation to us. I don't know how to make that work. Do we know how to make that work?
We're working on it.
Okay. But we'll take your donation over the internet. That's fine. I've seen this quote a lot of times. This is the founder of Digital Equipment. There is no reason for an individual to have a computer in their home. Why would you want that? All right. I love this tweet from Blockbuster. Tweet while you're leaving Netflix. The top 3 most creative tweets using Go Buy Netflix win a 1-year subscription to Blockbuster. That'd be great to have, right? I like this one. I hope the lead I'm mining will be used in your paint. That sounds like a threat, right? Asbestos, pure white fireproof snow. Don't put that on your house. Please. All right, I think we're doing one more. Yes. From the makers of aspirin, heroin. For non-addictive relief from cough since 1998. Yes, you didn't know, Bayer Pharmaceuticals, 1890, came with that. And then finally, I like this thing. Titanic sunk, no lives lost. That was a little premature. Esther and Mordecai have faith and confidence that somehow, some way, things will work out. They don't know how. It is interesting and ironic that Esther went through all this preparation and then was just sort of invited in. But she didn't know that's how it was going to go. She knew enough to know that she probably shouldn't just come right out and ask for what she wants, that she's going to need to work up to it. She didn't know how that was going to go, or frankly, how many banquets she was going to need to have. 2 was apparently enough, but I'm sure she was prepared to have more, should the king not be getting in the right sort of mood. Haman is convinced it will work out his way, the way that he wants it to. Big hint, it doesn't. Again, read chapter 7. We are called as people of faith to have faith. We wouldn't call it that if we weren't supposed to. We are to have faith in ourselves, we are to have faith in God and faith in each other. That faith doesn't mean that we always know exactly how things are going to go, and it does not mean that things are always going to go our way. It does not mean that there will not be challenges. It does not mean there aren't things that will be overcome. That does not mean that we won't have trials that we have to go through. What our faith tells us is that while all those things are happening, God is with us. That we never do those things alone, and as hard as life may seem sometimes, there will always be a path through, one way or another, a path through to a better place in this life or the next. That is the promise of faith. That is the promise of God. That is what we come here to remind ourselves of and celebrate. Haman does not have that sort of faith. Esther does. And so at the end of the day, Esther is the one, again, spoiler, who's going to come out on top. Not because she was more cunning, not because she knew, not because she was more devious or anything like that. It's because she continued to have confidence in herself and confidence in God. And she continued to do that thing that we've always been asked to do. She recognizes that she can't do everything. She cannot save her people on her own. But there is something she can do. She can throw a banquet. And when that gets it a little bit, she can throw another one. And then she can use the influence that she has and continue to do the something she can do. We today are called to do nothing less and nothing more. We can't fix everything. I wish I had a magic wand to change all the things in the world that I would love to change. But what I can do is the something that I can do. I can continue to try to bring you all somewhat entertaining, I hope, stories of faith and encouragement so that we can all continue to go about the work God calls us to. So no, you can't do everything. Yes, you can do something, and there is a something that God wants you to do. Our job is simple. All we have to do is figure out what that something is. And the best way to do that is to make sure that we keep those lines of communication between us and God open, that we continue to go to the stories that He's given us, go to our book, go to prayer, and go to each other. Do all those things that the church does so that we can know and trust we are on the right path. And if we do, then we can be Esther, and we don't have to worry about being Haman or Jafar. Amen.